It was a cold, unforgiving night, and the rain poured down relentlessly over the city, creating a dreary, melancholic atmosphere. In a dimly lit alley, a young mother stood, desperately trying to shield her baby from the chilling wind and rain. Her clothes, soaked through, clung to her shivering form as she held her infant close, whispering words of comfort. Despite her dire circumstances, the mother's eyes held a fierce determination, a will to survive, not for herself, but for the tiny life in her arms. Meanwhile, a millionaire, who had long grown accustomed to a life of luxury and ease, stepped out of his sleek black car a few streets away. His umbrella sheltered him from the rain, a stark contrast to the struggling figures hidden in the shadows around him. As he walked, he noticed the woman and her child, huddled in the corner, and for a moment, their worlds collided. Something about her fragile state struck a chord in him, stirring memories of a loss he hadn't allowed himself to revisit in years. Without saying a word, he pulled out $350 from his wallet and handed it to her, a small gesture of kindness that meant the world to someone in need. The woman accepted the money, her eyes brimming with gratitude and surprise, as she managed a soft thank you. That night, neither of them realized that this seemingly fleeting act of compassion would change both their lives forever. After their brief encounter, the millionaire walked away from the young mother and her child, but the image of her desperate state lingered in his mind. He was a man who had seen much of the world, had built an empire from the ground up, and lived in luxury beyond imagination. Yet, that night, something stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, a pang of empathy mixed with an uncomfortable reminder of the fragility of life. He couldn't shake the thought of the woman and her child, standing alone in the rain, struggling to survive. The millionaire wrestled with his own thoughts, questioning why he felt so compelled to help a stranger. After all, he'd passed by countless people in need before, each one invisible to his busy life. But something was different this time. Perhaps it was the way she looked at her baby, with such fierce love and determination, reminding him of someone he once cared deeply about. He decided, in that fleeting moment, to act. He pulled out $350, a sum that, to him, was almost trivial but to her would mean a lifeline. As he handed her the money, he noticed the look of surprise and gratitude on her face, mixed with caution as if kindness was a rarity in her world. She held the bills tightly, a glimmer of hope sparking in her eyes as she looked down at her baby and whispered words of comfort. For a moment, their eyes met, and he could see the unspoken story of hardship and resilience etched on her face. As she walked away, he found himself wondering if he had done enough. The money would help her today, perhaps even for the next few days, but what about the long term? The thought gnawed at him, especially as memories of his past resurfaced, the memories of a loved one he lost, someone who had once been everything to him. For the woman, the gift was a miracle. She hurried to find a nearby store, buying essentials like food, a blanket, and medicine for her child. Each item felt like a treasure, a small piece of comfort in her otherwise harsh reality. She knew this was only a temporary reprieve, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Little did she know, this act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would alter both their lives in unimaginable ways. As the millionaire returned home, he couldn't escape the thoughts of the young mother and her child. The encounter dredged up memories he had long buried, memories of a time when he, too, had known love, hope, and the sting of loss. The woman's determined gaze, the way she held her child close as if shielding him from the world, reminded him painfully of someone he had loved deeply. 23 years ago, he lost his beloved in a tragic accident, a loss that left an unfillable void in his life. In the years following her death, he threw himself into building his fortune, hoping wealth would numb the pain. And for the most part, it had. He rarely allowed himself to dwell on the past, choosing instead to focus on the empire he had created. But now, in the quiet of his lavish home, the memories flooded back with an intensity he hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, the woman found a temporary shelter for the night, using the money to buy her child food and a blanket. As she held her baby close, she thought of her own past, a life that was once filled with hope but was now a constant struggle for survival. She had been abandoned by those she thought would support her, left alone to fend for herself and her child. The kindness of the stranger gave her a glimmer of hope, but her mind was filled with memories of hardship, and she knew her battle was far from over. Through these parallel reflections, their stories began to intertwine. The millionaire's wealth couldn't fill the void left by his loss, and the woman's resilience couldn't erase the pain of her past. Yet, in the midst of their separate struggles, the act of kindness had bridged a connection between them, a connection neither fully understood but would soon come to reveal a deeper, almost faded link to their pasts. That night, as the rain continued to pour, the millionaire found himself haunted by the brief encounter he'd had with the young mother and her child. Back in the comfort of his luxurious home, he sat by the window, watching the city lights glisten in the rain, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of the woman's tired, desperate eyes, the way she clutched her baby as if he was her only remaining treasure. It unsettled him in a way that few things had in years, stirring up emotions he thought he had buried along with his painful past. With each passing hour he replayed the scene in his mind, wondering if he should have done more. $350 was enough to help her in that moment, perhaps buy her food and a warm place to sleep for a night or two. But what would happen after that? His usual philosophy of giving and forgetting didn't sit well with him this time. Instead, he was filled with an inexplicable sense of responsibility, a gnawing feeling that this woman and her child were somehow connected to the emptiness he'd felt for years. On the other side of town, the woman was settling into a temporary shelter. She used the money to buy some bread, milk, and a thin blanket for her baby, wrapping him in warmth for the first time in days. As she watched her child fall asleep, she felt a rare sense of peace wash over her. It was fragile, but it was there, a hope that, somehow, things might be okay, even if just for one night. In the quiet moments, she found herself thinking of the stranger who had given her this lifeline. Why would a man of such wealth and comfort stop to help her? She wondered what had prompted his generosity, what hidden story lay behind his eyes that mirrored her own pain. As the hours passed, both the millionaire and the young mother lay awake, caught up in thoughts of each other. For the millionaire, the night was filled with reflections of love and loss, memories of the person he had lost years ago. For the woman, it was a rare moment of gratitude and the faintest glimmer of hope. Neither of them realized it yet, but that sleepless night was the beginning of a connection that would soon alter both their lives in profound ways. The next morning, with a restless sense of urgency, the millionaire found himself unable to return to his usual routine. Thoughts of the young mother and her child still lingered, clouding his mind with questions and regrets. Driven by an inexplicable pull, he decided to return to the area where he'd last seen her. He had no plan, no reason to believe he would even find her, but something inside him told him he needed to go back. It was as though he owed it to his own past, to the memory of the woman he had loved and lost, to see if she was all right. As he walked through the rain-drenched streets, he noticed a small crowd gathering near the cemetery on the outskirts of town. Curious, he moved closer, his heart pounding as he spotted the familiar figure of the young mother standing by a gravestone, holding her child. She was talking softly, her hand resting gently on the cold stone, her face filled with a mixture of sorrow and reverence. He hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but something about the scene felt hauntingly familiar. Drawing nearer, he felt his breath catch as he read the name on the grave, the name of his beloved, who had passed away 23 years ago. Shock washed over him as he pieced together the connection, a link he hadn't foreseen. The woman at the grave was somehow connected to his past, to the very person he had cherished and mourned all these years. As he approached her, a deep sense of destiny settled over him, as if this encounter was meant to happen. The woman looked up, surprise in her eyes as she recognized him. In that moment, they both felt the weight of an invisible thread connecting them, stretching across years of loss, love, and separation. This unexpected revelation would soon lead to answers that neither had anticipated, uncovering a hidden bond that would forever change their lives. Stunned by the sight of the young mother standing at the grave of his beloved, the millionaire felt a storm of emotions rise within him, confusion, shock, and an overwhelming need for answers. He approached her slowly, trying to gather his thoughts, feeling the weight of 23 years of grief pressing down on him. The young woman turned to face him, her expression reflecting a mixture of surprise and guarded curiosity, as if she, too, sensed that there was more to this encounter than chance. As they stood in the somber stillness of the cemetery, the millionaire found the courage to ask her about the grave. With a shaky voice, he explained how the person buried there had been his world once, someone he loved deeply but lost far too soon. The young mother listened in silence, her eyes widening with recognition. It was then that she began to share her own story, a story that intertwined with his in ways he never could have imagined. She revealed that her mother had passed away a few years ago, leaving behind fragments of a life she barely understood. She had always known there were secrets, whispers about her family that never quite made sense. Her mother had once been in love with a wealthy man, a man she couldn't be with due to circumstances beyond her control. As she spoke, the millionaire's heart pounded. The pieces were falling into place. His beloved hadn't moved on easily. She had left behind a daughter, a piece of herself he had never known existed. The young mother's story unraveled before him, revealing the heartbreaking truth that she was, in fact, his beloved's daughter. She had grown up without the knowledge of her true heritage, struggling in poverty and hardship. And now, by some twist of fate, she stood before him, carrying the legacy of the woman he had mourned all these years. Tears filled his eyes as he processed this revelation, realizing the depth of the connection between them. The act of kindness he had shown wasn't just to a stranger, it was to his own flesh and blood, a daughter he never knew he had. The pain of the past mixed with a newfound sense of responsibility and love. He knew that from this moment forward he would do everything in his power to support her and her child, to honor the memory of the woman they both loved in different ways. In the months following their extraordinary encounter, the millionaire embraced his new role as a father and grandfather, filling his life with a purpose he had long thought lost. The young mother and her child became a vital part of his world, bringing warmth and meaning into the life he had once lived in solitude. Through helping her, he found a way to heal from the pain of his past and honor the memory of the woman he had lost. For the young mother, the reunion with her unknown father transformed her life completely. No longer struggling alone, she found herself supported and loved, able to provide her child with the stability and opportunities she had once dreamed of. Together, they shared memories, slowly piecing together the legacy of the woman who had unknowingly connected them. What had begun as a random act of kindness had led to a reunion, a discovery of family, and a renewed sense of purpose for both of them. Bound by love, loss, and fate, they embraced their second chance at family, knowing that the memory of their loved one would forever tie them together.